こんにちは、じんべいです。本日のテーマはこちら、イーロンマスクに逆張りするなということで解説していきます。今回はテスラのコアなファンであれば誰もが知っている自動車を分解して分析する自動車界のエキスパートで、マンロー&アソシエイツの創業者サンディ・マンロー氏と同社社長のコーリー氏がインベスターデーのテスラのプレゼン内容を自動車専門家の視点から分析し、詳細を語っています。この動画の内容はテスラ投資家であればぜひ知っていただきたい情報が満載だったので、ジンベイが重要だと感じたところをギュギュッと厳選して紹介します。本日は4つのパートに分けて動画の内容をお伝えします。1、なぜテスラはヘアピン開発に取り組むのか。2、価格破壊、テスラの次世代パワートレイン。3、業界を震撼させるテスラの 48V への移行。4、イーロンマスクに逆張りするな。こちらです。本日の動画をご覧いただければ、インベスターデイでテスラが発表した情報の中で何がすごかったのか、専門家の貴重な意見が知れます。テスラ投資家であれば必ず押さえておきたい情報ですので、少し専門的な内容ではありますが、ぜひ最後までご覧ください。ちなみにこのチャンネルでは毎週テスラやニューに関する企業情報や株価情報を発信しています。よかったらチャンネル登録とその横のベルマークをタップして通知をオンにしていただけると嬉しいです。それでは本編に入っていきましょう。まずはこちら、なぜテスラはヘアピン開発に取り組むのか、専門家2人の分析を見ていきましょう。ちなみにヘアピンは何かというと、電気自動車のモーターに必要なパーツの一つです。右の画像にあるような長方形の導線のことをヘアピンと言います。テスラは独自の技術でこのヘアピンを 100% オートメーション化し、製造できるようになるということです。これによりまた EV のパワーもアップ。要はテスラは今後高出力かつ低コストで EV の製造が可能になるということです。それでは動画を見ていきましょう。
The first thing I want to talk about is the little images, the Easter eggs,
yeah, exactly.
The hairpin stators. Yeah. Go ahead, talk about that.
Well, this is something that I've been talking about quite a bit, and in fact, the very first time we actually looked at one of the motors that came out of Tesla, I asked the question. I wonder why they didn't bother going into a hairpin design. Now, they didn't allow us into where the electric motors are made, but they showed us an Easter egg. It was in the presentation, and you got the chance to see. This one here is from the Chevy Bolt. This technique was actually invented by General Motors, but not widely used. But this right here, that's the joining point for the hairpin, and it's just like that. It's a hairpin that kind of winds its way in. You can see it. I got two different ones. This is the actual hairpin here, and then it comes through the other side, and I got it. And then it's laser welded on the opposite side, and that's what gives you your connection. So this is totally automatable, 100% automatable, and depending on who you talk to, this is anywhere from 20 to 30% more power. This is a really good idea. They didn't talk about it, but they showed it as an Easter egg in the videos. Yeah, and I'm telling you what, this is brilliant.
The reason you get there is you get better fill factor. So fill factor is these spaces right here are filled with more copper. There are some benefits to skin effect, but essentially if you could put more copper and vary the thicknesses of your hairpins based on the application and need, you can more carefully tailor this to the needs of your platform versus the wire ones or the wire wound ones. Typically have a lot of gaps and spaces in between all the circle wires.
Right.
Yeah.
続いてはこちら、価格破壊を引き起こすテスラの次世代パワートレインということで、コーリーさんはテスラが大幅なコスト削減を実施するドライブユニット、パワートレインが価格破壊をもたらし、サプライヤーを置き去りにすると述べています。では見ていきましょう。
Right. But the big thing was it had a different form factor. This thing here has a look, and if you're an engineer and Cory and I are, if you see something that you're expecting to look like this, it registers in your mind. But what we saw was something that was a rectangle.
Yeah.
It looked entirely different. So Cory spotted it first, then he trotted halfway in, and I went right in. I wanted to see what was going on. And this configuration, or the configuration that they had coming up is looks like totally different. It looks like a scrub on this.
You may say, why is that important? And the reason that's important is Tesla currently uses this generation of powertrain on all their vehicles. The Model S Plaid uses this, the Model 3, the Model Y, the Model S, the Model X. It's already, in our opinion, world-class leading in their ability of cost reduction and reuse and the ability to apply the same powertrain, gear train, inverter strategy on all their different models, whether it's a rear-wheel drive, standard range Model 3, whether you have a front-wheel drive unit that is an induction machine instead of internal permanent magnet, they're still using this architecture. It shows me that they're working on, this would be their fourth generation, because this is third. Because if you go back to the Model S and Model X, there's been multiple generations. So I know there's been a lot of focus on hardware but a new generation of powertrain means that they're not going to be happy with the status quo, because Tesla could still have manufactured this type of drive unit for another decade and still probably been competitive with most of the OEMs in the world. So many of the OEMs that are trying to catch up or emulate what Tesla's doing, they're now just getting there. And another thing from the presentation, 75% reduction in silicon carbide and roughly $1,000 cost for the drive unit. $1,000 cost. Now imagine you are a tier 1 supplier and you supply drive units, gearboxes, motors, inverters, and you're charging $2,000, $2,500, $3,500,
average
for a unit.
Right.
And now Tesla just said it's going to cost us $1,000. Now, when you walk into another OEM and try and sell your $2,000 unit, they're going to say, "Hey, how can Tesla make it for $1,000?" So this would be one of the hottest motor teardowns ever. So we specialize in tearing down these drive units. We'll get one eventually. We'll tear it down and we'll verify whether it's $900, $1,100, $1,300.
Right.
But that's big news.
続いて2人が語っているのはこちらですね。業界を震撼させるテスラの 48V への移行です。コーリーさんはこれがインベスターデーの中で最も大事で価値がある情報だったと述べています。それでは見ていきましょう。
Sandy, which I thought was the biggest announcement of the entire event, was a slide that they showed was how many electrical modules were owned and controlled by Tesla over the various models over the course of development. And it showed the Model 3 and the Model Y, and I might get this slightly wrong, but it was somewhere in the 50% of the modules were owned by Tesla on the Model 3, and it was 60 or 61% on the Model Y. The Cybertruck was 85%. And when we mean by modules, these are electric modules to do all the important things, whether that's your liftgate control, your door modules, your body controller, all the little things throughout the car, ADAS, the controller for the infotainment. 85% on the Cybertruck will be owned by Tesla, but they said the next generation vehicle, 100%. And the reason why that's important is it can minimize the wiring length, this is what they talked about, but I think it's more important for changeover to 48-volt architecture. Because the entire supply base has been 12 volts for decades and decades and decades.
Forever. Ever since they put a starter into the car, or sorry, let me rephrase that, a battery into a car. It's been a 12-volt battery.
Yeah, and let's not mistake this with other 48-volt mild hybrid systems which have been deployed over the last decade and a half. Those are typically used only for belt start generators and then high amperage systems like high amperage steering racks or maybe a brake-by-wire, which are going to draw a lot of current and amperage. So those were just 2 or 3 or 4 systems were ran by 48 volts, but the rest of the car, your door locks, your switches, your lights, or your HVAC, which draws less amperage, but some, still all 12 volts. So now imagine this. We are at a point in 2023 where the entire car industry is 12 volts. We can look back at this video in maybe 15, 25 years, and the entire auto industry most likely will have shifted to 48 volts.
I'll bet you it's faster than that. I'd say that if we look at...
this is everyone else.
I'm telling you, I think it's going to happen a lot faster. All they need... Look, We talked about the castings, those wherever the hell that thing is, for 10, 12, 14 years. Nobody went for it until Tesla did. These guys came out with this, this big casting here and talked about the other castings that are coming down. And 2 years, like in basically 2 years, Idra's got a shitload of new orders. I guarantee you, everybody on the planet, I can carry, I think right now, all the guys that do all the solenoids and all the 12 volt whatever stuff, they're sitting there going, ah! And they're going to make the switch. Because there's another thing you should know too. Let's look at these two. I want something a little more dramatic. Let's look at these two. That would be the wire size for 48 volts. This is the wire size for 12 volts. I need more wire. It gets heavier. Every time you move to a slightly higher amount of voltage, that's what pushes the amperage through, you can get away with a smaller wire size. Think about it, okay? Now these wires are normally really tiny. I could never show you because they are tiny. But any time that you can reduce the size of anything and reduce the weight of anything, you're going to get more range. The 48 volt system has been talked about since I joined Ford Motor Company in 1978. And nobody did anything about it. Oh, we can't get the suppliers to move on that.
Yeah, and the reason you get more range is not because you're not going to reduce the amperage and current needs of whatever you're doing. If you're steering the car, you're going to need the same amount of amperage. So if you jack the voltage up, the wire size drops. So the cost and the weight of the wires drop. So now here's how this actually makes a difference. If you can cut out 15 to 25 kilograms of copper out of the car, now the vehicle weighs less. So if the vehicle weighs less, it has a cascading effect. Now the amount of effort needed in that steering rack drops by maybe 0.5%. The whole vehicle benefits from it. Right. Now the vehicle's lighter, so you can get more range with slightly less batteries. Now you have slightly less batteries. So in order to truly make a next-gen vehicle that's low cost, you have to do everything the best way possible.
Right.
And Tesla decided that they're going to forego the entire supply base and said, we are developing automobiles the way they should be developed. We're not relying on the vestigial past of 12 volts. I think it's the biggest takeaway from the entire event.
I think that's true, and we save the best for last always, and that system is going to make a gigantic difference. But even more importantly, what's going to happen? Well, first off, by the way, there's another thing you should know too. When you drop the wire diameter by about a half to get to 48 volts, copper is one of the more expensive components and one of the more heavy components that are in vehicles. That's why a lot of people will swap high power from copper to aluminum. Aluminum conducts as well, but not as well, not as good, but it weighs a whole lot less and it costs a lot less as well. So moving to the 48 volt system is going to put every component supplier on notice. And I'm telling you, right now, I believe that there's got to be every boardroom at every tier 3, those are tier 3 kind of guys, tier 3, in some cases tier 4 suppliers, they're going to be in a panic attack. How are we going to get to 48 volts? They probably looked at it, but they probably never thought they'd ever have to do anything because, in essence, engineers aren't allowed to design for 48 volts. And purchasing agents were going to say, I can get a cheaper one if it's a 12 volt. And that's kind of like the way it works, unfortunately, in the auto industry. So,
そして最後はこちら。イーロン・マスクに逆張りするなです。長年自動車業界に携わり、ここ最近はテスラの動向を自動車製造の専門家として間近で見てきたサンディさんは、テスラはこれからも業界をリードし続ける、イーロン・マスクに逆らうなと言っています。非常に握力高まる内容ですので、最後までご覧ください。
And the long-term nature of the presentation really struck me. I said this on stage. I feel like Tesla no longer has an imposter syndrome. I feel like for the first 3 to 5 years of their existence, they were just trying to show the world. I say 3 to 10 years of their existence. They were trying to show the world that they can do it. particularly when they were trying to produce the Model 3. I think they pushed them out to the market a little early when they had the fit and finish issues. But now they're kind of hitting their stride. 1.3 million vehicles last year, on pace for probably 2 million this year. Developing a whole new architecture will allow them to hit all sorts of new markets, particularly the low end. They could have just said, hey, we're going to go after large SUVs next, which would be a highly profitable endeavor, but they're focused on the world, because if they're building in Mexico, I believe that plant is going to produce for other regions. If you can produce that low-cost car and sell in South America or Mexico itself.
Well, I look at it this way: the plant's going to be the same size as the existing plant that they've got in Texas. If it's the same size and you're making a smaller vehicle, it'll have less options and it'll have less parts. Guess what? It's going to be
a couple million.
Yeah, right? I'm thinking 2.5, maybe even 3 million out of that plant. People are going to, oh, you can't make it. Yeah, you can't make a 3 million out of a plant. But you know what? You can't make anything out of 48 volts. I heard that too. And you know what? Oh, you can't make, these batteries can never be made. Every time somebody opens their mouth and says, that can't happen, Elon shows up with, oh, here, you want to look at that? Well, you know, I don't think that's going to work. And it's always the same. You want to be a naysayer? Go ahead. Go and be a Hindenburg. I don't give a rat's ass. At the end of the day, eventually, you're always going to lose. Always. Because, especially if you're betting against Elon Musk. Don't do it. Yeah.
今回の2人の対談動画いかがだったでしょうか。自動車専門家によるテスラ分析ということで、今後のテスラに対して非常に期待が持てる内容だったのではないでしょうか。ぜひ今後も自信を持ってテスラ株を長期ホールドしていきましょう。最後に米国株投資をされている方へ無料で使える米国株投資情報アプリのご紹介です。皆さんもすでに米国株投資アプリ moomoo をダウンロードされましたでしょうか。テスラやNIO投資をされている方には moomoo は必須のツールです。moomoo の利用者は1900万人以上、ナスダック上場企業が提供している投資アプリです。moomoo はこれまで数々の賞を受賞、投資家からの評価も高いアプリとなっています。今日はmoomooアプリの非常に便利な機能の一つ、銘柄比較をサクッとご紹介します。銘柄比較を利用するにはまずアプリを開いて下にあるマーケットのアイコンをタップします。次に画面上部にある銘柄比較をタップ。するとこのように登録している場合はテスラやNIO、シャオペンといった EV 銘柄の株価から時価総額、出来高、EPS、PR、アナリスト評価、目標株価、期間所有率、粗利率、総資産などなどありとあらゆる企業データ、株価データを確認でき、比較できます。簡単に利用できてとっても便利な機能なので、ぜひ皆さんも楽しみながら銘柄比較をしてみてください。このmoomooは登録も非常に簡単です。メールアドレスまたは電話番号を登録し、パスワードを設定するだけ、1分ぐらいでできちゃいます。概要欄とコメント欄にmoomooのリンクを貼っておきますので、ぜひアプリをダウンロードし、登録してみてください。今回の動画は以上になります。最後までご視聴いただきありがとうございました。今後もテスラやNIOに関わる情報を配信していきます。よかったらいいねとチャンネル登録で応援よろしくお願いします。それではまた次回の動画でお会いしましょう。